Welcome to the Packaging Therapist podcast. I am your host, Jessie Schwartz. I've been a packaging engineer for 20 years and currently the founder of Strategic Packaging Partners, where we are obsessed with creating strategic approaches to packaging to enable growth and cost savings in the CPG industry. My goal in this podcast is to discuss hot topics in the packaging space to enable you to make strategic decisions for your business that impact the bottom line and take the chaos out of manufacturing. Join us for technical discussions about packaging, and let's make the world of manufacturing better together. Welcome, everybody, to another show of the Packaging Therapist. Today, we are joined by Futamura. They are the purveyors of flexible film in the cellulose compostable space. Welcome, guys, to the show. Why don't you guys give us a brief introduction, each of you, and we'll kick it off.
Okay, sure. I will lead. I'm Dave Craggan, and I'm the commercial leader for the Americas. I've been with the company or in the packaging industry for about 14 years now.
Fantastic.
Hi, my name is Christopher Tom, Division Manager for Sales and Marketing. I've been with the company 19 years, and I've been in flexible packaging for 21.
And my name is Chris Tyra. I'm the regional sales manager for Futamura. I've been in the flexible packaging world for 15 years. And very happy and proud to be now on the sustainable compostable side of things after selling plastic for many years. So,
trying to reduce your karma a little?
Yeah, and my carbon footprint.
Oh, and your car, that's very good. Yeah. All right, cool. So today we want to talk about cellulose-based films. There's so many different options in the market right now for compostable films. We want to talk specifically about the NatureFlex that you guys are making. What are the right applications? What are some of the limitations? How do we think about using compostable films and which products? And so let's dig into some of the details. So you guys are making two different types of films right now. One, you have a cellulose based line. Let's talk specifically about that. Kind of tell us how do you make your film? Where does it come from? What are the raw materials? Have at it.
So we make cellulose films, which includes cellophane, formation cellophane, which is the original packaging film, and NatureFlex, which is the compostable version of cellophane. So the main constituent or raw material of our films is wood pulp. It's dissolving wood pulp. And what happens is basically we take this wood pulp and we turn it into a viscose. And through a process, we regenerate the viscose into a clear film. So the film is cast as a clear film, and we make rolls of it, and then we coat the films. That's one of our specialties, is coating the films, which give it various characteristics such as moisture barrier and heat sealability, and we make other versions of the film, such as like a metallized film, which I know you're going to ask about that later. And we do some colors as well, like a weight film. But in a nutshell, we take, like I said, it starts off as a wood pulp, and it becomes a packaging film, which can be used in a lot of different flexible packaging applications. And then as for the NatureFlex, it'll be composted.
Okay, fantastic. So let's get into some of those applications. What types of products are really good fits for the NatureFlex films?
From what we do, I mean, we're across the board in terms of the markets that we serve. We've started out in the food, beverage markets. I think that's our primary focus over the years. And within that those markets, there's subcategories such as confectionery, dried foods. I mentioned the beverages like for stick packs and that sort of thing. Produce, overwrap for produce, for bar wrap, like for protein bars or on the go health food bars, snacks, bakery, food service, pharmaceutical, little pill packs for pharmaceutical, and then expanding that into non-food, what we call industrial type applications, across the board, from anything from automotive. There's a lot of companies out there that are now starting to really embrace sustainability and start walking the walk and talking the talk. And so there's a lot of companies out there that have industrial applications that want to reduce their carbon footprint, that want to make a mark on improving their use of single-use plastics. And in doing so, they're looking for things like flow wrap for HEPA filters or automotive parts or medical device parts or, a slew of different things. So we can, anything that is essentially, a plastic application, for the most part, we can fulfill those same standards and performance with our products as well.
Okay, so I work in food and beverage, and a few years ago, I tried to implement a compostable film, but the barrier properties weren't there, and the product didn't survive shelf life. So things have changed dramatically in the last few years. So kind of update us on the barrier properties. You could stick with food and beverage, specifically around getting the intended shelf life, getting the intended protection against moisture loss or flavor loss. Say a little bit about the science behind the compostable films and where you've come from, and then where you are now.
Sure. So in terms of barrier and shelf life, you can combine our films together. Like we have high barrier clear films, and we also have the metallized film, which is our highest barrier film. So you can combine the high barrier clear films with our metallized film. And then you could also add layers of other biopolymers, such as a PLA or even a met PLA to give even added, moisture barrier. And that'll give you, in most cases, it'll give you the required, MVTR and OTR barriers that you're looking for and shelf life. It's always incumbent on the brand owner to do their own shelf life testing to make sure that the packaging is fit for use and that'll meet their shelf life requirements. But the proof is where our films are being sold. We sell a lot of our films for coffee applications, which is a very, very sensory, dependent application, right? So if our films are good enough for coffee, they'll be good enough for a lot of other different applications for food and beverage.
Air fresheners too, Chris, right? We're just talking about that one today, right? An air freshener, the barrier that you get, that you need for an air freshener is another example where we see that. It's funny you mentioned the shelf life item though, because when we think about like over the last 5 years, evolution of how films are being used. And we use the phrase proof of concept often in our meetings and conversations internally, even when we talk to customers who maybe come to us with a new idea. The proof of concept in so many different applications has changed over the last 5 years. And we think that, and the reason why I bring that up is when you ask the question about, okay, maybe that barrier didn't work in a project that was conducted 5 years ago. What may have changed now is that the partnerships that we have grown substantially in the last 5 to 8 years. Who we work with on suppliers, co-suppliers, and that could be all encompassing of a laminated structure, right? So if you take a fully laminated structure and put it on the shelf today versus any of your conventional plastic packaging that you would have seen in the past, we would probably see equal to or just as good, equal to, perhaps even better shelf performance as that product.
Well, I think you bring up another good point too, and that is when you were referencing working with other suppliers that are making different layer structures that are being combined or laminated together. I think that's a little bit different than how the industry typically thinks of sourcing a film. It's usually like a finished film from one supplier. But you guys are being more nimble and becoming experts at the structure that you make, and then going to other experts and combining the structure that they are experts at creating to deliver these dynamic films that people are looking for. Would you agree that that's a little bit of a different approach than your traditional poly films? And maybe you could speak to some of the benefits that you see coming out of that kind of more of a partnership to create a finished film than just, casting the whole thing in one place.
Yeah. I think as a group, I think all three of us could probably add a little bit something here with experience, but there's the monolayer applications where you can go just as far, just as fast with our films. Monolayer with no print in it is an easy drop-in application for certain products. We think about maybe twist wrap on a candy, overwrap on a bar where dead fold is needed. Chris mentioned a little bit of that earlier. And then you start getting in maybe to a 2-layer lamination, right? Okay, and how fast, how far can you go with 2? And then also with 3. And when you start getting into those 2 and 3s, the complexity grows a little bit. Does take some time, but I would say also one of the things that we've seen over the last few years is the evolution of one of our partners getting into the sale of pre-laminated films, where they're taking that step out of the conversion process. So there are companies out there now that are buying our NatureFlex films and pre-laminating them to rolls where they are ready to go onto a print machine.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget the industry has been working on compostable films for a long time, but we're just getting to the point where scale makes sense, and we're getting enough companies interested in using the product, so the volume is growing. And when you get more business is when you can start thinking about how you go to business differently and being able to leverage volume in a different way. So it'll be exciting to see how things change even in the next 5 years from now too. So I want to go back to, we talked about the barrier of the film, and we talked a little bit about metallized compostable film. So I get a lot of questions like, well, if it's metallized, it certainly isn't compostable. So maybe we could swing back to kind of the nerdy details around, okay, what is really compostable and why is metallized film compostable?
Sure. So the metallized NatureFlex or cellophane, what it is basically, it's our clear cellophane that's vacuum metallized on one side with aluminum particles, it's a very, very, very thin layer, just atoms thick, and it's only vacuum metallized on one side. So it gives the appearance.
With aluminum, that's a natural element.
Yeah.
And aluminum comes from the earth. It comes from alumina. You want to get really nerdy and technical.
Right.
It comes from alumina, which comes from the earth. So the film, like I said, while it looks like a foil, it's not a foil. It's just a cellophane that's been vacuum metallized on one side, and it's fully compostable, both home compostable, industrial compostable, and it doesn't leave any eco-toxic quantities in the ground. No heavy metals. It's totally safe. You could regrow plants, vegetables and stuff, and eat them. He'll be safe. It's totally safe.
And I've got a little show and tell, Jessica, too, to add on to what Chris is saying, because I think it's important for people to see it, right? So we did this little experiment. We have this company called Alter Eco that makes these nice little round, amazing tasting truffles that they wrap their truffles in our metallized film. And that's all it is. It's a monolayer. It's printed on one side. But this is an example. I took a bunch of their little truffle wrappers, and I just put them in my soil in my raised beds. And this was about 3 weeks. And I labeled it A4, and this is A4. I did A5, A6, A7. Anyway, you can see within 3 weeks, this is one half that was sitting on my desk. And this is the half that was in the soil, and I just buried it. This part was sticking out, but the rest of it, as you can see, is gone in 3 weeks, and it's metallized. How about that? So
that's fantastic. Well, and like you said, it's like it breaks down to a molecular, small atomic particle in the earth versus it's not actually metal going into the ground. And like you also said, when you get BPI certification, you have to be able to grow plants in the soil that's created, and it can't create any kind of dangerous substance in the plant, right? So you can't the corn grows, but also you'll die if you eat the corn. So it has to be, bio-neutral, or it can't impact future generations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, I think Chris grew some corn from that soil. Chris, did you eat that corn? Yeah.
I didn't, but I would, absolutely, because it's BPI certified, and they do all that ecotoxicity testing in the soil. So
cool. So I also hear questions around, okay, we've got this compostable film, so why can't I just print all the brilliant graphics on it that I want to and just fill the whole thing with ink? So let's talk a little bit about inks and how they differ in the compostable space and some of the some things you can do, some things you can't. Let's talk about inks.
Sure. So so the rule with BPI is that all the constituents such as the inks cannot be more than 1% of the weight of the package. And the sum total of all the inks and the adhesives cannot exceed 5% of the weight of the package. And this is, if the inks are, because most inks that are used are not compostable, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are some that are solvent-based or some that are water-based, so you don't want to leave, you want the plant regrowth. You want to minimize the chances of plant ecotoxicity, leaving heavy metals. So that's why they have that rule to minimize the amount of inks and or adhesives that you put in the package. Like there are some compostable adhesives. There are some compostable inks, but the inks is a trickier part. Is finding an ink that'll work, that'll that you'll have good ink adhesion to the substrate. So it's a little bit trickier for the inks, but if you respect the 1%, 5% rule, then you'll be fine.
Probably worth pointing out as well, with the ink suppliers that we know, and there is always further evolution of technology in packaging. And we're seeing more and more offerings of compostable inks from some of our co-suppliers. And also the fact that we had brushed over the high receptivity to inks that our cellulose-based products have. So typically you will see our material used in a multi-layer structure as the print web, because of the outstanding graphics that you can print on our film.
And then, okay, so give us an idea then. If let's say we had a pouch and we wanted to put full graphics on it, are you guys saying that you wouldn't be able to cover that whole pouch with inks? Like when you say 1%, that gets a little bit, sometimes it's confusing because you're like, well, how much does this pouch weigh? Or can you give an idea of percentage of like coverage that people could expect to get? Is it more just printing your brand and so it actually belongs in a carton or something because all you can do is kind of print your logo on the bag? You can't really get all the necessary information, or say more about that.
I think we could give an example of an actual commercial product that has BPI certification, and both Chris and Christopher are familiar with this company. Coffee bag. So it is a coffee bag. I believe it's a 12-ounce bag of coffee, either grounds or beans, depending on how they package and how they're offered. But it is, I believe, a 3-color print job with black, white, and some red. And that package is covered from top to bottom, front to back in inks, black ink primarily with a little bit of white and a little bit of red, and does actually pass the BPI certification.
That's great to know.
Correct, Jens? Anything
Right.
to add to that, I guess, is, should we?
Yeah, I mean, like typically with printing, you're dealing in it's processed colors, right? So so you're just combining, different inks to create, certain colors and graphics. So that's, one way where you can perhaps not go past that 1%, is if you're combining, cyan, magenta, yellow, black, or what are the Pantone colors you have, combining those colors to get the desired graphics, and then without surpassing that 1%.
Now, I would also offer that we have our European partners. We do have a end use application for cheese over wrap. It's a monolayer of Matriflex. It does have a 6-color print, and that is certified compostable as well. So I think the important point in all this is that you can, again, replace a single-use plastic with a compostable version of material without sacrificing performance.
or sacrificing your brand image on the shelf.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Correct.
exactly.
And that is if your goal is to if this is an end user, obviously you talk to your packaging converter, and they should be knowledgeable. If you're going to them for a compostable package, they should be knowledgeable of what they need to do to get this structure to pass. And like David mentioned before about pre-laminate films that that are fully certified, that are out there on the market right now too. But if the ultimate goal is to be BPI certified for industrial, and then there's other certifications for home composting and in the industrial composting, the BPI. If that's your goal, then yeah, you've got to abide by all these things and make sure you mind your P's and Q's when it comes to design and working with your converter partner to make sure that it does pass all those things. There's some people that want to have some kind of message, but they don't necessarily want to go the certification route right away. They want to just test it out in the market and see how responsive their consumers are to that, and they may not get certification right away, and then that type of thing. You're not necessarily tied to all those things, but eventually, if you want to get there, you need to meet that. But there's you got to keep all these design things in mind when you're saying, okay, what's the end goal of going to a compostable package and replacing a single-use plastic for, what do we want to accomplish with that?
Yeah. And that kind of goes into the next topic of the end of life and what happens to the films. We have the industrial compostable side of things. And industrial compostable, they're controlling the heat, they're turning the pile, they're making sure that you're getting enough oxygen so that the aerobic metabolisms of the microbes can continue on. And more and more people, I think, are getting concerned about litter, and to some degree in the U.S., but also abroad, where maybe the waste collection isn't as reliable or does not exist. And so some compostable materials, they'll break down faster than plastic will in the environment. But I see a shift to different companies offering now backyard compostable solutions too. So sometimes people are confused that they can't just take a BPI certified compostable product and just put it in their compost heap and think it'll disappear quickly. But then there's also this new space opening up around backyard compostable. So do you can talk a little bit about the differences between the two and where you guys see that fitting in with Futamura?
Okay, so the thing about people get a misconception about home composting. Like you said, they think that you could take a BPI certified package and throw it in their compost heap and it'll go away. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, nuanced than that. First of all, the structure needs to be TUV certified for OK home compost, so it needs to be home compostable, right? Because some industrially compostable products will not compost in a home composter. Secondly, with home composting, and I know this because I used to home compost, it's an actively managed process. It's like an industrial composter, but at a much smaller scale. You need to turn it. You need to make sure there's enough moisture in there. You need to have the right carbon to nitrogen balance. So it's an active process. So even if you take a home compostable structure and you throw it in your compost, you still need to do all those things that they do on a larger scale in an industrial composter. And then the other aspect of that is we as a company, and as I guess civic minded people, we don't advocate throwing stuff out into the streets. However, worst case scenario, if our packaging does end up somehow in the streets or not in a place where it's supposed to be, it will eventually go away, as opposed to plastic packaging, which will stick around for 500 to 1,000 years to leave microplastics.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the accidental, something blows away. It's going to disappear and break down into the
We
environment.
like to say if it blows away, it goes away. So that is
Nice.
We haven't trademarked that one yet, but it's one of many that are in the
Now it's out in the
it's in the
world, so
stable.
look out.
It is out in the world. Yes.
And in the U.S., we have this problem with plastic pollution. But if you compare that with other parts of the world, and David goes to other parts of the world a lot, and he takes pictures and notes this on a regular basis, that some of the developing countries have a much worse plastic pollution problem than us. And so this is not just a U.S. problem; it's a global thing that we have to address. We're doing our small part to manufacture films that can replace some of that. We're not going to be the total solution to any type of plastic pollution, and it's a multifaceted solution, right? It's across government agencies, it's across education of consumers, it's across having the infrastructure in place, it's having the commitment by companies and brand owners to get there. So we're here and we're ready for them when they're ready to make a decision, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's, but it's a global problem. And, like I said, we're here to solve a small piece of it for now.
Chris brings up a good point. It's the solution part. And, we like to think that sustainability when it comes to packaging is a three-legged stool, right? Where you have compostable, reusable, recyclable. And if any one of those legs of that stool are removed, then you lose balance and it's not going to be supported. So having all three of those are important, right? And regardless of where you travel, domestic or international, the lack of infrastructure is the biggest concern that probably all of us should have when it comes to what do we do with all the packaging waste that we generate. Because even I've lived in a pretty large city that did not offer recycling, where I had to drive it 1.5 miles from my house to actually deliver it. How many people are going to commit to doing that on a regular basis? It almost becomes somebody else's problem at that point, right? And then there is the more rural areas where that infrastructure doesn't exist. And what happens to materials that don't find their final resting place, in those situations? So infrastructure is a huge part of the problem, regardless of where. However, we do know that there is reality, that there is what escapes, as Chris was saying, and what happens to that material when it escapes. And thankfully, ours can go away in a safe manner. Just like Chris's planter at home, right? That wasn't a home compostable environment.
Specifically around the infrastructure that's necessary to really, take compostable packaging back to the earth, right? And have kind of this neutral end of life story. So the last data I saw was somewhere around 3% of people living in this country, in this developed country, have access to curbside compostable collection. And so, where do you guys see this industry going, even in the next 3 to 5 years? Because certainly, we're at the lowest we'll ever be, right? And the hope is that will increase to some extent.
Well, I'll let the guys also add to anything that I may miss. But we're learning a lot from Europe and the steps that they're taking. We're seeing a really a lot of momentum building on adoption of policy in the UK that is working, and what may not be working, there's adjustments being made in adoption of legislation that's happening over here. So it's both. You've got companies that are actually making their own sustainability choices to say we want X, Y, and Z for our packaging. And then there's also at state level where we hear, okay, we're going to make changes related to packaging and how it's affecting the environment. So with that, there's the evolution of extended producer responsibility laws that we see building momentum here in the U.S. I think we're at 5 right now, and growing. So as that continues to happen, there's going to be more of an awakening and our awareness of, okay, how do we become a lot more fluid in the process of finding a package that we can feel good about, to know that it's meeting the regulations that have been set, and also can provide a protection to the products we're offering to our consumers, as well as shelf life and reduction of food waste.
Yeah, it really seems like we're at a good point right now for changes to start in the especially in the food and beverage industry. I think even a few years ago we didn't have the necessary barrier structures, the throughputs on manufacturing equipment, the baggers and things were a lot slower, and so everything costed more, not just the material but everything else. And so kind of where we are now is a much better place. Can you guys say a little bit more about the cost of, like, if folks are thinking about cellulose-based films, compostable films, say something about what they could anticipate from a material standpoint, and then from an operation standpoint in their plants. How does cellulose film run through equipment, and then kind of on the front end of that sourcing piece, how it compares to plastics?
I would say on a macro level, and I'll let the guys maybe talk a little bit more on the micro, but on the macro level, it goes back to the conversation of, okay, what kind of application are we talking about? If we are thinking about an application where it's a monolayer cellophane that is in a straightforward print application, we're going to be very competitive with the traditional plastic production. I would say that right off the bat, that we can be very competitive there. Where you start to get a little bit more pricey is when you do start to look at the laminations of other substrates, and that's where some of the challenges come in. However, my take on cost always ties back to end of life in one way or another. So, and this is a reality of, right, the cost of compostable material, cellophane or cellulose-based, PLA, or a recyclable plastic. There's an initial cost, right? Chris and I, we talk about this all the time. There's that initial cost of manufacturing or extruding a plastic. Absolutely. What is the cost of collection and having it sorted at a recycling center and have it regenerated into another piece of plastic that is to then be recycled again? And so if we were to say that the life cycle of a reusable plastic material is 4x, do you then take that first time cost and multiply it by 4 to say that's what your true cost of that plastic is? Right. So when you look at the two comparatively, I would say maybe there's not going to be a whole lot of difference when it comes to end of life.
Right.
Yeah, and if you look at the history of our product, right, it's cellophane. Traditionally, cellophane, it was the first packaging material. It took us from the general store to the grocery store back in the 1900s. It was the main source of flexible packaging back in the day. Plastic came around and replaced it because plastic is cheaper, and it always has been. And you look at comparable prices of cellophane versus plastic back in the 60s, and we've done this study, and it's exactly the same difference as it is today. So it's not ever going to change. But what needs to change is the perception of, what do you, for example, with certain type of recycling methods, and there's going to be recycling methods out there that are going to be more expensive. It's more expensive for a non-virgin plastic than a virgin plastic. It's much cheaper to go and just keep funneling virgin plastic into the pipeline versus, the recycling. There's a cost that goes up and up and up with recycled resins. And then you got to compare that with our film as well. And so there's that. But just in general, like Dave was saying, you got to look at the whole life cycle of the product and where does it fit, and where does it fit into your company's goals in terms of where you want to be. Right. If it's adding a couple cents to a candy bar, are people really going to care? But who's going to care is maybe the Walmart buyer who doesn't want those 2 cents added on to the candy bar to sell in the Walmart. So there's a lot of things that go into the decision making around it. Infrastructure, like we talked about, is one, but there's a whole nother slew of other complicated financial things that people consider when they make the switch. So,
and I think as EPR rolls out, however it does, I mean, the idea is the materials that cause less impact and the less material that you can get by using, there's an incentive around that. So hopefully that's a good thing and can kind of help usher in the next generation of packaging materials that ultimately produce less waste. So, well, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. Anything else you feel like you missed that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Sure. Just as far as inquiries, right? So we are a global company. We are the world's largest manufacturers of cellulose films. We have a global footprint. We have manufacturing in the U.S., the U.K., in Japan. We're over 2,000 employees strong, operating in all the markets that Chris had mentioned. Proof of concept is something that we love. And take a more recent example, we've talked about the evolution of packaging. We like to maybe compare this one to the first person who broke the 5-minute mile, right? There was something that could never have been done or had never been done. Breaking a 5-minute mile running was an impossible task. But then once it was actually done, it was a repeated barrier that was broken, right? As far as multiple people exceeding the 5-minute or running the 5-minute mile in less time. With that, putting liquids into a compostable structure was something that was unheard of just a few years ago. Not only have we had a company do it successfully recently, we now have multiple companies that are also working on putting their products. I know we can think of a liquid in a pharmaceutical application, a pharmaceutical veterinarian application, home food meal kits, to condiments, to detergents. So if you think about, okay, well, there's limitations to compostable materials. That's pretty compelling in terms of there's the limitations are fewer and fewer than what they used to be. So we're really encouraged by that type of innovation that we see people developing with our materials.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. Thank you. Thank you for all you had to share today. And if you have any further questions, there will be contact information in the show notes. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you found the content helpful, please be sure to share your comments with me by leaving a review so that I can keep the topics coming your way. If you haven't already followed me, click subscribe on your podcast app so you get notified the next time we release a show. If you have packaging issues you want to talk about, contact us via our website at www.strategicpackagingpartners.com and click on the Contact Us page. Thanks, everyone.